She was born at the bottom of a world that worships power, an Omega meant to serve, not to fight. But the night she saved the Alpha King's child, everything changed. The Moonfire woke inside her, and the king who swore to hunt her down realized he was bound to her instead. Love and destiny are about to collide, and only one will survive the fire. The night smelled of pine sap, wet earth, and blood. The forest was too still, as if even the wind was holding its breath. Mira crouched behind a fallen tree, her heart thrumming so loud she could feel it in her throat. She wasn't supposed to be here, no Omega was. Omegas kept their heads down, did their work, and stayed invisible. That was how you survived in a kingdom where wolves were ranked by strength, not by spirit. But then she'd heard it again. The small, desperate cry of a child. A sound that cut through the night like a plea meant only for her. Her body had moved before her mind caught up. She crept through the underbrush, bare feet silent on the damp leaves, until she reached a small clearing. There, under the fractured glow of the moon, 3 rogues circled something, or someone, curled against a tree. The rogues were half-shifted, monstrous silhouettes with eyes burning orange. The smell of blood was thick, sharp, unmistakably royal. Mira's breath caught. The child couldn't have been more than 6 winters old, his clothes torn, his tiny hands trembling. His hair, pale as sunlight on snow, was matted with dirt and blood. Royal blood meant death, for anyone who touched it. She could have turned away. She should have. Her kind didn't interfere with royal affairs, not unless they wanted to end up hanging from the gates as a warning. But something in that boy's trembling form cracked her resolve. Maybe it was the way he whimpered his father's name. Maybe it was the way she saw her own small, frightened self in him, forgotten, unwanted, unprotected. Before fear could change her mind, Mira snatched the small silver dagger from her belt and stepped into the clearing. The rogues turned, grinning when they saw her, a lone Omega, unmarked, trembling. "Look what wandered in," one of them snarled. Dinner delivered itself. Mira's fingers trembled on the hilt of the blade. "Leave him," she said, surprised her voice didn't break.
"Now."
The first rogue laughed. "You'll die screaming, little girl." Maybe she would, but she didn't care anymore. The moment he lunged, something inside her split open. The world sharpened. Every heartbeat around her echoed like thunder. She moved without thought, sidestepped the attack, drove her dagger up beneath the rogue's jaw, and tore free before his body even hit the ground. The others froze, startled by the sudden flash in her eyes. Light, bright and white, nothing like the dull amber glow of an Omega. Mira didn't notice it herself. She only knew that a heat had awakened deep inside her, fierce and familiar, as if it had been waiting all her life for this one moment. The second rogue came at her, claws out. She ducked, rolled, sliced his leg open. The third fled before she could even turn. When it was over, the only sound left was the child sobbing. Her hands shook as she wiped the blade clean on her skirt, forcing herself to breathe. The boy stared at her through tears, his blue eyes wide with terror. "It's all right," she said softly, kneeling before him. "You're safe now." But as she reached to lift him, she caught the scent again, faint beneath the blood and dirt, but unmistakable. The boy's scent carried not just royal blood, but dominance, command, and something older. A mark that only one wolf in the kingdom bore. He wasn't just royal. He was the Alpha King's son. Mira's stomach turned to stone. Saving him wasn't an act of mercy. It was treason. Still, when he whimpered and reached for her, she gathered him into her arms. His small fingers clung to her cloak as if she were the only thing keeping him tethered to the world. Somewhere beyond the trees, a horn sounded, a deep, resonant note that shook the night. The royal trackers were coming. They'd find the bodies. They'd sent her on the prince. And when they did, they wouldn't care that she'd saved him. To them, she'd be nothing but a lowborn Omega who dared to touch what was sacred. Mira adjusted her grip on the boy and started running. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stop now. The The forest stretched endlessly, a tangle of roots and shadows that seemed determined to slow her down. Mira's breath burned to her lungs, and her legs screamed for rest, but she didn't dare stop. The child's small arms clung to her neck, his soft sobs muffled against her shoulder. Each one was a knife of guilt she couldn't afford to feel. The river would be her only chance. If she could reach it before the hunters spread their scent line, maybe, just maybe, the water would hide them. She angled downhill, every muscle tuned to the sounds around her, the snapping of branches, the call of an owl, the faint, terrifying echo of the royal horns. They were closer now. She could almost feel the vibration in her bones. Her foot slipped on wet moss. She caught herself against a tree, panting, her heart hammering so loud she thought the whole forest could hear it.
The boy stirred.
"My father's coming," he whispered, his voice trembling but hopeful. "He'll find me." Mira didn't answer. What could she say? That his father's men would tear her apart before they ever thanked her? That if the Alpha King himself found her with his son in her arms, her death would be swift and public? She only said, "I know. We just have to keep moving until he does." The trees thinned at last, and the sound of rushing water met her ears, a river, wide and cold, silver under the moonlight. She waded in without hesitation, biting down a gasp as the icy current clawed at her legs. The boy whimpered at the cold, but she shushed him, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. Halfway across, she heard it, a low, echoing howl that froze her blood. That was no rogue call. That was the Alpha King's hounds. The ones bred to track any scent, through water, through fire, through anything short of death itself. Mira's pulse went wild. She stumbled to the far bank, dragging herself and the boy into the reeds. Her breath came in ragged bursts as she pressed him against her chest, willing her heartbeat to quiet. Through the grass, torchlight flickered on the opposite shore. Dozens of riders dismounted, armored silhouettes gleaming. She could smell their command aura even from here, the pure, suffocating dominance of alphas and betas sworn to the king. "Search the banks," one shouted. "The boy's scent ends here." Mira ducked lower, her face half submerged in the mud, her entire body trembling. The boy shivered against her, and she prayed to the old gods he wouldn't make a sound. She could see them clearly now, the royal trackers moving methodically, some sniffing the air, others shifting partially into wolves, their golden eyes cutting through the dark. One of them paused. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring. "There's another scent," he growled. "Faint, but not the rogues. A woman. Omega." The commander turned sharply. "Alive. Could be. Recent." The commander's expression hardened. "Find her. The king will want her alive long enough to answer questions." Mira's stomach turned. Alive long enough. She knew what that meant. Interrogation.
Torture.
An example to every Omega who thought themselves more than a servant. She waited until they spread farther along the river, until their voices were swallowed by the trees again. Then, shaking, she rose, keeping the boy close. "We have to go," she whispered. He looked up at her with eyes so impossibly blue, they seemed to glow. "You're not scared?" She almost laughed, half hysteria, half exhaustion. "Of course I am." She brushed the mud from his cheek. "But I've been scared my whole life. Fear's just another thing to carry." He didn't understand, but he nodded solemnly, trusting her completely. That trust felt heavier than the child himself. They moved deeper into the forest, following no path but instinct. The moon climbed higher, ghostly light filtering through the branches. For a moment, the world was eerily quiet again. Too quiet. Then a whisper brushed her mind, soft, alien, but unmistakable.
"Run."
Mira froze. The word wasn't sound. It was inside her head, pulsing like a heartbeat. She turned in all directions, but there was no one there. Just trees, shadows, and the river whispering behind her. "Did you hear that?" she asked the boy. He looked up, confused. "Hear what?" Her throat went dry. She shook her head. Nothing. But her heart knew better. Something had spoken to her, and it wasn't human. She adjusted the boy on her hip and kept walking, faster now. The strange voice lingered, an echo she couldn't shake. And as the night deepened, she began to sense it again, that faint hum beneath her skin, the same power that had burst free when she'd fought the rogues. It flickered, restless, as if waiting to be called again. She didn't know what she'd awakened. But somewhere far behind her, the Alpha King raised his head toward the moon, caught her scent on the wind, and felt it too. The hunt was no longer just about finding his son. It was about finding her. The royal citadel of Arundel was carved from pale stone, rising above the forest like the bones of a god. At its highest tower, beneath the vast silver crest of the moon crown, the Alpha King stood in silence. His eyes, cold, gray, and inhumanly sharp, were fixed on the map spread across the war table before him. But his mind was already far from the parchment and ink. He could still smell it, the faint, impossible scent that clung to his son's bloodied tunic when the trackers returned empty-handed. Not the stink of rogues. Not the earth and iron of the forest. No, this scent was strange, ancient, almost luminous. And woven through it, impossibly, was the trace of an Omega. An Omega who'd killed 3 armed rogues and vanished with his heir into the night. Around him, the council murmured in hushed tones, afraid to speak too loudly. The king's temper was legend. He had built his rule not through mercy, but through the raw certainty of dominance. His name, Oren Valenhart, was enough to still a room, to silence dissent before it could be voiced. Yet now, even he was uneasy, because nothing about this hunt made sense. "She must have help," said General Rael, his lieutenant. No unranked Omega could fend off 3 rogues, let alone carry the prince through half the northern woods. The king didn't look up. "You think she had accomplices?" "I think she was sent," Rael said grimly. "We've known the rogues take coin from the shadow clans. Perhaps." "Enough." The king's voice cut through the chamber like a blade. "My son is alive because of her. Don't mistake your ignorance for understanding." Rael bowed his head, chastened, but his eyes flickered with unease. "And yet she runs." "She runs because she knows what my soldiers do to Omegas who touch royal blood," Oren said. His tone was flat, unreadable. He turned to the fire, its light catching on the sharp planes of his face. "Perhaps she's wiser than most." He didn't say the rest aloud, that there was something about that scent that unsettled him. Something that made the wolf within him stir, restless, as if he'd inhaled the first breath of a storm he couldn't yet see. Oren looked toward the open balcony. Beyond the walls, the wind howled across the forested valley, carrying with it the faintest trace of that same scent. It was fading but not gone. It called to something old in his blood, something he hadn't felt since his own awakening under the eclipse 13 years ago. "Double the trackers," he ordered quietly. "Every outpost, every watchtower, every wandering patrol. I want every Omega in the outer villages accounted for. Bring her to me alive." Rael hesitated. "And the punishment, my lord?" The king's eyes met his, unreadable. "That depends on why she ran." The hunt stretched into the night. Across the kingdom, horns echoed from valley to valley, and hundreds of riders poured into the wilderness. The moon hung high, a silent witness. Far from the citadel, Mira trudged through the marshlands at the forest's edge, half dragging herself forward now. Her cloak was torn, her arms numb, but she refused to stop. The boy had long since fallen asleep, his face pressed against her shoulder. She envied him that peace. Every step was a battle between exhaustion and fear. When she finally stumbled upon the ruins of an old watchtower, she nearly wept with relief. The stones were cracked, half swallowed by vines, but it was shelter. A single fireplace, long cold. A roof that still held. She laid the boy down near the hearth and collapsed beside him, trembling from head to toe. Her hands were raw, her boots slick with mud. She reached for the small flask tied to her belt. Water, barely a swallow left. She gave it to the boy instead. He stirred, blinking groggily. "Where are we?" Safe, she said softly. For now. He nodded, too tired to question it. You smell strange, he mumbled before sleep claimed him again. Mira managed a broken laugh. So, do you, little prince? But her smile faded quickly. She turned toward the cracked window, listening to the night. The forest had grown too quiet again. Not peaceful, watchful. Something was out there. She could feel it. Her skin prickled, that strange hum beneath it pulsing stronger now. When she looked down, she saw the faintest shimmer of white light beneath her skin, like moonlight trapped beneath the surface. She pressed her palms to the floor, heart pounding. The stone beneath her fingers responded, faintly vibrating as if alive. She yanked her hands back, gasping. The glow faded, but the echo of it remained, thrumming through her bones. She stared at her palms, terrified and awed in equal measure. What was she? Her mother had always told her she was born under an unlucky star, the runt of her litter, frail and scentless, left for dead until an old healer found her. But sometimes, when she was very young, Mira had seen strange things, patterns in light, whispers in water, dreams that came true. She'd learned to hide them, to fear them, because Omegas weren't meant to be special. They were meant to serve, to obey, to vanish into the crowd. And yet, tonight she had fought like someone else entirely. A faint sound jolted her upright, a low, distant growl carried on the wind. Then another, closer. Too close.
Hounds.
Mira's breath caught. She snatched the boy up, his sleepy protest muffled against her chest. She darted toward the door just as the first torchlight flickered through the trees outside. Voices followed, gruff, impatient, closing in. She slipped out through a narrow gap in the back wall and sprinted toward the ridge beyond the ruins. The forest opened onto a steep ravine, moonlight spilling down the rocks below. She could hear the hunters behind her now, the jingle of armor, the pounding of paws. There was nowhere left to run. The edge was slick beneath her boots. She clutched the boy tighter, feeling his heartbeat against her own. He was trembling now, awake and terrified. It's all right, she whispered. Just hold on. Mira. She didn't give him a chance to finish. She leapt. The world fell away in a blur of silver and shadow. Wind tore at her hair, at her cloak, at everything that anchored her to the earth. She braced for the crash of rocks, the agony of broken bones. But it never came. The air caught her. Or something did. For a moment, they hung suspended in the moonlight, as if the world itself had paused. Then a surge of energy rushed through her, white-hot and soundless, and the ground rose to meet them like a soft breath. They landed in the shallow river below, unharmed, the water glowing faintly where her feet touched. The boy stared at her, eyes wide with wonder. You're not normal. Mira couldn't speak. Her body shook with power she didn't understand, her pulse thrumming like thunder beneath her skin. Above them, on the cliff's edge, the trackers gathered. Their torches cast long shadows down the ravine. One of them shouted. She jumped. No body, nothing. The commander stepped forward, sniffing the air. His face went pale. Not possible, he muttered. That wasn't just an Omega. Far above the river, hidden in the treeline, another figure watched silently. The Alpha King himself. He had followed his own trackers in secret, unwilling to trust second-hand accounts. And now, as he saw the faint shimmer of light below and caught that strange, ancient scent again, something in his chest twisted. He whispered, barely audible even to himself. What are you? And somewhere below, half submerged in the glowing water, Mira whispered the same words into the dark. The current was cold enough to bite. Mira kept to the shadowed bank, one arm locked around the prince, the other gripping the slick stones beneath the surface. She didn't know how far she'd fallen or what had caught her, but the faint memory of light clinging to her skin told her it wasn't chance. Something had slowed the descent, softened the blow, and wrapped them both in a strange, pulsing warmth that had vanished the instant she touched the river. Now the light was gone, leaving only the steady murmur of water and the rasp of her own breathing. The boy shivered against her shoulder. "I thought we were going to die," he whispered. "So did I," she said softly. Her voice trembled, though she tried to hide it. "But the moon still wants us alive." He pulled back enough to look at her. His small face was pale, eyes too bright for a child who'd seen blood and death before sunrise. "You said your name is Mira?" She nodded. "My father will come for us." "I know. He'll be angry," the boy added after a moment. "But he won't hurt you. He never hurts people who save me." Mira didn't answer. She didn't have the heart to tell him what she'd seen of the king's punishments, the way even highborn betas bowed and trembled when he entered a room. To a child, a father's wrath was just thunder. It made noise, but it always passed. To everyone else in the kingdom, it was the kind of storm that left nothing standing. She carried him along the bank until she found a hollow between two boulders. The space was barely large enough for the both of them, but it was dry, sheltered from the moonlight, and invisible from the ridge above. She set him down gently. "Sleep," she murmured. "We'll move again at dawn." "What about you?" "I'll watch," she said, though her eyelids already felt like lead. He hesitated, then reached for her hand. His fingers were small and warm. "You don't have to be scared. My father always finds people." "That," Mira said quietly, "is exactly what I'm afraid of." When his breathing finally deepened into sleep, she let herself collapse beside him. The exhaustion hit her like a wave. Every muscle screamed, every bone ached, but her mind refused to rest. That voice, Run, still echoed somewhere deep inside her skull, soft and rhythmic, as though it was part of the river's song. When she closed her eyes, she saw flashes, a temple buried in snow, wolves made of starlight, a crown hovering above a pool of white fire. She didn't know if they were memories or dreams, but they left her shaking. Mira had lived her entire life, trying not to be noticed. She'd scrubbed the palace floors when she was younger, always keeping her head down, pretending to be invisible. But she'd seen things the others ignored. The way the royal markings on the Alpha King's throne shimmered under moonlight, the way the priests whispered about prophecies they claimed were myths. One, in particular, had haunted her. "A child of the low moon shall bear the light of the first wolf. Her hand shall wake the sleeping flame, and her heart shall bind the Alpha's blood to its fate." She'd laughed at it then. Every servant did. Stories to keep the weak hopeful. But now, with the memory of her own hands glowing like captured moonfire, the laughter felt hollow. The boy stirred beside her. His scent was faint but distinct, royal, yes, but tangled with something else. Something that felt familiar. She brushed a strand of hair from his face, her heart squeezing painfully. She'd killed for this child without knowing why. Some instinct had taken over, something older than reason, fiercer than fear. Dawn crept slowly over the horizon. The forest filled with the scent of wet leaves and smoke. Somewhere to the east, horns sounded again, distant but deliberate. The hunters hadn't given up. Mira woke the boy. He rubbed his eyes, blinking at the pale light. "Already? We can't stay," she said. "They'll follow the river soon." He nodded solemnly. For one so small, he carried himself with a strange dignity, an echo of the man who had sired him. They followed the stream southward, moving through the fog that clung to the water's edge. The ground was soft and cold beneath their feet. Twice she stopped to listen, certain she heard footsteps that weren't theirs. But each time, it was only the wind through the reeds. As the sun climbed, the boy began to tire. Mira slowed her pace, scanning the treeline for shelter. Her stomach twisted with hunger. She hadn't eaten since the day before, and her limbs felt like they were turning to glass. Then she smelled smoke, fresh, faint, wood smoke mingled with something sweet. She froze. A campfire meant people, and people meant danger. But it also meant warmth and food, maybe even help. She crept forward, keeping low until she could see through the trees. A small cabin sat beside the water, its roof sagging under moss, smoke curling from a crooked chimney. An old woman sat outside, stirring something in a pot over the fire. Her back was bent, her hair white as frost. Mira's instinct screamed run, but the boy tugged her hand. "I'm hungry," he whispered. So was she. And if the woman was harmless, maybe they could hide long enough to rest. Mira stepped into the clearing slowly, hands raised to show she wasn't a threat.
"Please," she called.
"We're travelers. We mean no harm." The old woman turned, her eyes sharp despite the wrinkles. "Travelers, are you?" Her gaze slid to the boy. "That one's no commoner's child." Mira's stomach dropped. "He's lost. I'm taking him home." The woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded toward the fire. "Bring him closer. He's pale as death." Mira hesitated only a second before obeying. She guided the boy forward and lowered him near the warmth. The old woman ladled soup into 2 wooden bowls and handed them over.
"Eat."
"Then tell me why the king's hounds are sniffing this forest raw." Mira froze, the spoon halfway to her lips. "You know?" The woman's smile was thin. "Child, I know everything that walks these woods, including what shouldn't." The boy glanced up. "What do you mean?" The woman ignored him. Her gaze pinned Mira like a knife. "You touched power last night. Didn't you feel it?" Mira swallowed hard. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Liar," the woman said softly, almost kindly. "The moonfire doesn't choose by accident. It only wakes when the old blood stirs. Tell me, girl, who is your mother?" Mira's mouth went dry. "A servant. She died when I was born." And the woman's eyes gleamed. "Then she kept her secrets well." "What secrets?" Mira asked, her pulse pounding. Before the woman could answer, a crack of a branch snapped from the forest edge. The hounds were near. The woman's head lifted sharply. "Go," she hissed. "Back door. The river will hide you longer if you follow it south." "And, girl?" Mira paused in the doorway. "Don't fight what's waking in you. You'll need it before the moon wanes." The word struck her like a blow. She didn't wait to ask what they meant. She seized the boy's hand, and together they vanished into the trees once more. Behind them, the cabin door swung open on its hinges, creaking in the rising wind. The old woman watched the woods a long time before turning back to her fire. Her eyes glowed faintly white in the morning light. Orrin Valenhart did not sleep easily. When he finally collapsed in his private chamber, exhaustion heavy as armor on his shoulders, the moon was sinking low over Arundel. The silence of the castle was deceptive. He could still hear the faint howls of his riders returning from the night's hunt, still taste the metallic tang of frustration in the air. The trackers had found nothing but scraps of torn fabric and the footprints of a woman carrying a child. Every report said the same. The Omega had vanished like mist at dawn. He'd sent the patrols out again at first light, but he knew, instinctively, in the marrow of his bones, that she was gone beyond their reach. Still, he couldn't stop thinking about the faint, unexplainable glow one of the soldiers swore he'd seen along the riverbank. He should have dismissed it as nerves. Instead, it haunted him. He stripped off his armor, washed the dirt and blood from his hands, and poured a measure of winter fire liquor into a glass. It burned as it went down, sharp and clean, but it did nothing to dull the storm inside him. When sleep finally came, it came violently. He stood again in the forest, barefoot, shirtless, the cold slicing through his skin. The moon above him was full and huge, bleeding light down onto the river below. Across the water stood a woman. Small, slight, her cloak torn, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. He couldn't see her clearly, but he could feel her. That strange scent again. Wild, electric, threaded with something ancient that made the wolf inside him snarl in recognition. "Who are you?" he demanded. His voice was rougher in the dream, the words more growl than speech. The woman didn't answer. She only raised her hand, and light spilled from her palm like liquid silver. The river flared to life, shining brighter than the moon itself. Orrin shielded his eyes. When he looked again, she was standing right before him. Not an Omega, not even human anymore. Her eyes glowed white, her skin streaked with that same light that had burned through the forest the night before. "You shouldn't have found me," she whispered.
"I didn't," he said.
"You came to me." Something moved behind her, a shadow, vast and indistinct, the shape of a wolf formed of smoke and fire. It pressed close, its voice filling the air and his skull at once. "The light has returned, Alpha." Oren tried to speak, but his throat closed around the sound. The shadow leaned closer, its breath cold as death. "The bond is not broken. It was never broken." The light flared, and then he was awake, heart hammering, the echo of that voice still curling through his head like smoke. He sat up, drenched in sweat. The fire in his chamber had burned down to embers, but the air felt alive, charged. Oren rose, crossed to the window, and pushed it open. The night was nearly gone, dawn spilling pale over the valley. Below him, Arundel lay quiet and disciplined, its banners stirring in the early wind. But he could feel something beneath the calm, a ripple, faint and distant, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He turned as the door opened and his advisor, General Rail, stepped in. The man bowed deeply. "Forgive the intrusion, my lord. News from the scouts." "Speak." They found the cabin, 2 leagues south of the river bend. Empty. Signs of recent use. A woman and child, judging by the prints. There was a second scent, faint, someone old. Possibly a witch. Oren's eyes narrowed. Did they find the witch? Rail hesitated.
"No, sire."
The cabin burned before we arrived. No trace of anyone alive. Then she burned it herself. So, it seems. Rail studied his king for a long moment. "You believe she's connected to this Omega?" "I believe," Oren said slowly, "that the world does not send omens for no reason, and that what I saw last night was not mere chance." Rail frowned. "You saw something?" Oren didn't answer. He turned back to the window. "Double the search to the southern borders. If she crossed into the wildlands, I want word from every tribe within the day." Rail bowed and left, but not before the king caught the flicker of unease in his expression. It was fine. Let him fear. It kept them loyal. When the chamber was silent again, Oren closed his eyes and breathed deeply. For the first time in years, his wolf stirred fully awake beneath his skin. It wanted to hunt, not for blood, but for something else. Something it had lost and forgotten long ago. In the wilderness miles away, Mira followed the river until her legs trembled and her throat was raw from thirst. The boy, she'd learned his name was Kale, trudged beside her now, no longer carried, his small steps stubborn and steady. He didn't complain once. Every now and then he'd glance up at her, curiosity flickering in his bright eyes. "Why do you look sad when you think no one's watching?" he asked suddenly. She started.
"Doi."
He nodded solemnly. "My father looks like that sometimes, when he's thinking about my mother." Mira didn't know what to say. The queen had died 3 years ago. Every servant in the palace had whispered about it for months. Some said it was illness, others poison. There were darker rumors, too, that she died in childbirth, but not of natural causes. "I miss her," Kale said quietly. "He does too, but he never says it." Mira swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." The boy looked up at her, as if measuring something only he could see. "You don't smell like a servant," he said finally. That stopped her cold. "What do I smell like?" He frowned, searching for words. "Like moonlight and rain. Like something old." She forced a laugh. "That's a strange thing to say." Kale shrugged. "My father will find us soon. He always does." Mira looked away before he could see the fear in her eyes. Because in her gut, she knew he was right. The king was coming, and when he found them, he would see the light that lived beneath her skin and decide whether she was salvation or threat. As the sun set behind the trees, Mira and Kale reached the edge of the old road that led south into the wildlands. She could smell the salt of the distant sea on the air, and something else, freedom, maybe, or doom. She took one last look at the forest behind them, where shadows gathered like ghosts. "Keep close," she said. The boy slipped his hand into hers, small and trusting. And somewhere behind them, unseen in the growing dark, a silver-eyed hawk took flight, circling once before heading toward the citadel, carrying with it the scent of the runaway Omega straight back to the king. By the time Mira and Kale reached the foothills, the forest had thinned into scrub and mist. The river split into smaller streams here, winding through the lowlands before vanishing into the cliffs ahead. The air was colder, sharper. Every breath tasted of iron and pine sap. They were beyond the king's lands now, or close enough to pretend. The wildlands lay ahead, untamed and lawless. No alpha ruled here. The old clans had broken away generations ago, swearing fealty only to the moon and to whatever gods still listened. For most, the wildlands were a death sentence. For Mira, they were the only place left to run. Kale trudged beside her, his boots soaked through, his small jaw set in that stubborn tilt she was beginning to recognize. He didn't complain, even when his steps faltered. Mira wondered if all royal children were taught that kind of restraint, or if this one was simply born older than his years. They stopped at the edge of a ravine to rest. From here, the land opened wide, a vast sprawl of gray-green fields, ancient stones, and ruins half buried in moss. A place that smelled of memory and ghosts. Kale shivered. "It's quiet." "Too quiet," Mira murmured. Her instincts were on edge. The forest behind them whispered in ways that didn't feel natural anymore. The birds had stopped calling an hour ago. Even the wind had gone still. She crouched, running her fingers through the dirt. The faintest shimmer of light pulsed beneath her skin again, responding to something she couldn't name. That was when she heard it hoofbeats. Slow at first, then faster, echoing from somewhere beyond the ridge. Not the heavy rhythm of royal trackers. These were lighter, uneven. Whoever it was, they weren't coming from the north. Mira stood, pulling Kale behind her. "Stay close," she said, her voice low. Figures appeared on the rise. Riders cloaked in rough leathers, their mounts small but quick. Bandits, perhaps, or worse. Their faces were hidden beneath masks made from bone and cloth, their movements silent and deliberate. Mira's heart stuttered. She had no strength left to fight, no plan, no weapon but the dull dagger still strapped to her thigh. The lead rider dismounted and approached, hands empty, posture calm. A woman's voice came through the mask, low and steady. "Put down your blade, Omega. We're not the king's men." Mira didn't move. "Who are you?" "The question," the woman said, "is who you are." The wind shifted, carrying the boy's scent toward them. Several riders stiffened. Mira saw recognition, or fear, flash through their eyes. The woman pulled off her mask, revealing a face that was both hard and striking. Silver scars traced her cheekbone, catching the light. "That child," she said. "He's royal." Mira's pulse hammered. "He's under my protection." A smile ghosted across the woman's lips. "Protection. That's a dangerous word out here." She studied Mira for a long moment, then gestured to the others. "Lower your weapons." "She's telling the truth. I can smell it." The tension eased, but not by much. The woman motioned for them to follow.
Come.
"You'll freeze out here. My camp's not far." Mira hesitated. "And if I refuse?" "Then the king's hounds will find you before sunset." Mira glanced down at Kale, who was watching her with wide eyes, trusting her to decide, trusting her to survive.
"Fine," she said.
"Lead the way." The Wildlander camp was hidden in a hollow between the cliffs, half covered by nets of branches and brush. Smoke rose from several small fires, their glow reflecting off tattered tents and sharpened stakes. These weren't mere scavengers. They were a clan, hardened and organized. Children darted between the tents, carrying water or tending to small tasks. Every one of them bore the same faint silver scars across their forearms, a mark of belonging. Mira kept close to Kale as they entered, feeling dozens of eyes track them. The masked woman removed her cloak and tossed it aside. "I am Liss," she said simply, "warden of the border pack." Mira gave a wary nod. "Thank you for—" "Don't thank me yet." Lys's gaze sharpened. You brought trouble with you. The king's riders crossed our land last night. If they find you here, they'll burn this camp to ash. I didn't ask to be hunted, Mira said. Lys tilted her head. No one ever does. She studied Mira again, as if weighing something invisible. There's power on you, girl. The kind that stinks of prophecy. You feel it, don't you? Mira's mouth went dry. I don't know what you mean.
Lys smiled faintly. You will.
The wildlands remember things the kingdom has tried to forget. Come nightfall, you'll see. They fed her and Kale by the fire, rough stew and flatbread. Mira hadn't tasted food in days, and the warmth hit her like a wave. Kale ate in silence, gaze darting between the warriors who passed. He didn't seem frightened, just curious. When the boy finally drifted to sleep against her side, Lys sat down across from her. You should leave before dawn. My people won't fight the king's army for a stranger, not even one who glows in the moonlight. Mira stared into the fire. You saw that?
Lys nodded.
The river told me. Mira laughed softly, without humor. Of course it did. Lys leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the flames. There's something waking in the world, Omega. You can feel it, can't you? The old power stirs again. The moonfire doesn't rise for nothing. It always demands balance. Blood for blood. Mira looked down at her hands, remembering the glow that had saved her. What am I supposed to do with it? Survive, Lys said simply. Until you meet the one it's calling you toward. The king, Mira whispered. Lys didn't confirm it, but the silence that followed was answer enough. Far to the north, in the great hall of Arundel, Orin stood before the throne of blackened steel. Reports littered the table before him, maps, witness accounts, sightings that all led nowhere. The Omega and his son had vanished into the wildlands, and with every passing hour, his control slipped further through his fingers. He dismissed his counsel and stared at the map alone. His hand drifted over the southern border, over the empty spaces where no law reached. He could still smell her faintly in his memory, that strange, electric scent. It lingered like the promise of rain. When he closed his eyes, he saw her standing in the river again, light pouring from her hands. And for the first time in years, he felt something almost like fear. Not of her, of what she might mean. He whispered her name, Mira, though he shouldn't have known it. The word came to him unbidden, carried from the dream he still couldn't forget. Somewhere in the wildlands, a sleeping woman stirred at the same moment, heart pounding, as if she'd heard her own name carried on the wind. Mira awoke before dawn to the hush that always comes before danger. The campfires had burned to coals, painting the tents in dull red. She could hear the slow breathing of the wildlanders, the faint rustle of fabric, the restless shifting of horses tethered in the dark. For a moment it almost felt safe. Then the air changed. Her pulse stumbled. The scent of smoke, fresh, sharp, crept in from the east. She nudged Kale awake and whispered, "Quiet now." He blinked at her, still half in dreams, but obeyed. When she stepped outside the tent, she saw Lys already waiting. The woman's cloak was thrown over her shoulders, her hand resting lightly on the hilt of a curved blade. "You smell it too," Lys said. "Riders?" "Not yet," Lys murmured. "But the wind says they're coming." She tilted her head toward the hills. "If you go now, you can reach the cliffs before they find this place. Follow the ravine south. It'll take you to the coast. There's a fishing village there. The people owe me a debt. Tell them my name." Mira hesitated. "You'll stay?" "My people will not run from soldiers," Lys said simply. "But we'll buy you time." There was no arguing with that tone. Mira clasped Lys's forearm, the old warrior's grip steady and strong. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Go," Lys told her. "And remember what I said. The moonfire marks its chosen. You'll never be rid of it now." The path south was narrow and treacherous. The ravine cut deep through the stone, its sides slick with moss and water. Mira half slid, half climbed, keeping Kale close behind her. Every scrape of boots on rock echoed like a shout. They moved until the air turned salt-sweet and the cries of seabirds reached them. The cliffs gave way to the endless sea, pale silver beneath the morning sky. For a moment, Mira could breathe again. The ocean had always been a myth to her, something distant and holy, a place where the moon's reflection slept. Kale ran ahead, laughing, his feet splashing through the tide pools. The sound cut through the weight of fear, like sunlight. Mira smiled despite herself. He was still a child, after all.
But the peace didn't last.
The moment her boots touched the sand, she felt the hum again, that faint vibration beneath her skin, low and insistent, like a second heartbeat. The sea answered it. The waves pulsed in time with her breath, the tide rising a little higher with each step. She knelt, pressing her fingers to the wet sand. The glow came instantly, curling out from her hand in threads of white light. The water around her shimmered, reflecting the moon even though the sun had risen. "Mira?" Kale's voice was small, uncertain. "It's all right," she said, though she wasn't sure it was. "It's just the tide listening." He crouched beside her, eyes wide. "Can you teach me to do that?" She laughed softly. "I don't even know how I'm doing it." But when she looked closer, she saw the faintest mark forming on her skin, a symbol etched in light, circular and incomplete, like the crescent moon. It burned cold, not painful, but impossible to ignore. She clenched her fist, trying to will it away. It dimmed, but did not vanish. Behind her, Kale whispered, "It's beautiful." Before she could answer, a horn echoed from the cliffs above. Low, distant, unmistakable. The sound of pursuit. Mira's heart lurched. She grabbed Kale's hand and pulled him toward the dunes. "We have to move." They ran until the sand turned to gravel, until the cliffs loomed again in jagged towers. The wind carried the scent of horses, fresh sweat, iron leather. The king's riders had followed faster than she'd hoped. At the top of the nearest ridge, she saw a shape silhouetted against the sky. Tall, broad-shouldered, motionless. The sun caught his armor and turned it white. Her breath caught in her throat. Even at this distance, she knew. The Alpha King. He was alone, no soldiers in sight, watching them from the cliff's edge like a god carved in steel and shadow. She couldn't see his eyes, but she felt the weight of his gaze as surely as if his hand had closed around her heart. "Stay behind me," she told Kale. "Mira," he whispered, terrified and awed at once. "That's my father." "I know." The wind roared between them, carrying the smell of salt and pine and blood. Oren didn't move. Then, slowly, he descended the ridge, his steps measured, unhurried, as though certain she had nowhere left to go. Mira backed away until her heels struck rock. The sea crashed behind her. The cliffs rose before her.
Trapped.
Oren stopped a few paces away. His presence filled the air, impossible, magnetic, a gravity she couldn't resist. His voice, when it came, was deep and steady. "You've run far enough." Mira's throat tightened. He was alone. The rogues would have killed him. "You think I don't know that?" His tone was soft, dangerous. "My son told me everything." He looked at the boy briefly, then back at her. "You saved him. And yet you fled." "What did you expect me to do?" she demanded. "Wait to be executed for touching royal blood?" A muscle jumped in his jaw. "You think I would have ordered that?" "I don't know what you would have done," she said. "But I've seen what your soldiers do in your name." Silence stretched between them. The waves thundered against the rocks. Then his gaze dropped to her hands. "You carry the mark," he said quietly. Mira froze. The light was faint but visible, the crescent on her skin, pulsing softly in rhythm with her heartbeat. "What are you?" he asked. She lifted her chin. "I could ask you the same." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe admiration. "You don't even know what that is, do you?" "I didn't ask for it," she said. "And I don't want it." He took another step forward, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "It doesn't matter what you want. That mark binds you to the Moonfire. To the Alpha line." His eyes, gray as storm clouds, locked on hers. "To me?" Mira's breath caught. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible." But even as she said it, The glow on her skin brightened, and his own hand flared in answer. A faint, mirrored mark, hidden until that moment. The air around them shimmered. Oren's composure faltered. For the first time, he looked almost human. "The prophecy," he murmured. "Blood to bind the flame." Mira stepped back, shaking her head. "I'm not your fate." He didn't argue. He only looked at her, as if trying to decide whether to believe it himself. Behind him, the distant thunder of approaching riders broke the moment. His soldiers were near. The spell of stillness shattered. Oren turned, his voice sharp now. "Go south to the cliffs of Era. There's a path hidden in the rocks. It'll take you beyond my patrols." Mira blinked, stunned. "You're letting us go?" He met her eyes. "You saved my son. That debt is mine. But when next we meet, the debt will be paid." Then he turned and walked back toward the ridge, his cloak snapping in the wind. Mira stood frozen, the sea crashing at her back, her skin still glowing faintly. Kale clung to her hand. "What does it mean?" he whispered. Mira stared after the king's retreating figure. "I think," she said softly, "it means the world's about to change." The wind from the sea had turned colder, its edge sharp with rain. Mira led Kale away from the cliffs until the sound of the surf was a distant hiss behind them. She could still feel the echo of the king's presence, like heat lingering long after a fire goes out. Every step away from him should have been relief, yet she could not stop touching the faint mark on her palm, half expecting to find it gone. It wasn't. It pulsed under her skin with each heartbeat, as if it had decided that she was part of something larger whether she agreed or not. Kale was quiet. The boy's small hand fit easily into hers, warm and certain in a way she envied. When they stopped to rest beside a stand of wind-bent pines, he finally looked up. "You and my father. The light between you, what was it?" She wished she had an answer simple enough for a child. "Something old," she said. "Something that shouldn't have woken." He thought about that, frowning in concentration. "Does it mean you'll come back to the castle?" The question hurt more than she expected. "No," she said gently. "Your home is there, Kale. Mine isn't." He nodded, but his grip tightened. The boy had seen too much to be comforted by promises. By dusk they reached the coast road, little more than a trail etched into the cliffs. To the south the hills fell toward a narrow inlet where a handful of huts huddled against the wind. Smoke rose from them, thin, blue, honest smoke. Fishermen. Mira hesitated at the edge of the settlement. She could smell salt, tar, old nets. Ordinary life. After days of running, it felt unreal. A woman in a rough wool cloak spotted them and approached, wiping her hands on a rag. "You look half dead," she said, eyeing Mira's torn clothes and the boy's pale face. "You running from someone?" "From the cold," Mira answered carefully. The woman snorted. "I, and half the world besides. Come inside before the rain starts." They followed her to a low house built of stone and driftwood. The warmth inside hit like a blow. The woman, her name was Bryn, set food before them without questions. Fish stew, coarse bread, water from a clay jug. Mira ate until the ache in her stomach eased, and Kale fell asleep by the hearth. Only then did Bryn speak again. "You carry a scent I haven't smelled since I was a girl," she said quietly. "Moonfire. My grandmother told stories about it. Said it was the breath of the first wolf." Mira's spoon stilled. "Your grandmother was from the wildlands?"
"I,"
said the moon marks her chosen once in an age. Always ends in blood and crowns. Bryn's eyes searched Mira's face. "Be careful, girl. Magic like that doesn't wake unless the world's about to tear." Mira didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window watching the sea, the reflection of the moon trembling on the waves. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Oren standing above her on the cliff, the light binding them like a chain. At the same hour, far north in the citadel, Oren sat alone in the council chamber. The torches burned low, throwing long shadows across the marble floor. Before him lay a sealed letter written in his own hand and addressed to the high priestess of the Moon Temple. He had written the same words 3 times and burned them twice. Now he read the final version again. The mark has appeared. The Moonfire answers to one outside the line. Send word of what the old prophecies require, for I fear the bond is not of my choosing. He sealed it with wax and the crest of the wolf. Rael entered quietly, bowing. Your Majesty. Scouts report a ship left the southern inlet at dawn.
No banners.
2 passengers. Oren's eyes flicked up. A woman and a child? So, the dockmaster claims. The tide carried them east. He dismissed the general with a nod, but the news struck something deep in him. A mix of anger, relief, and something dangerously close to longing. She was alive, beyond his reach again. He told himself it was better that way. Yet when he turned toward the window and saw the moon's reflection trembling over Erendel's towers, the bond burned faintly beneath his skin. He pressed his palm against the mark hidden under his glove. It pulsed once, and for an instant he thought he felt another heartbeat answering his from far away. Morning came gray and wild. The sea churned under a rising storm as the small fishing boat pitched across the waves. Mira held the tiller steady, rain stinging her face. Cale clung to the bench beside her, wrapped in a wool cloak Bryn had pressed into his hands. Where are we going? He shouted over the wind. East, she called back. As far as this will carry us. She didn't know what waited there. Only that every instinct screamed to keep moving. Behind them the cliffs were a blur of mist. For a moment she thought she saw a flicker of light on the highest ridge, like a signal fire. The storm broke fully then, sheets of rain hammering the deck. Mira's mark burned cold, the light beneath her skin flickering like lightning. The sea responded, waves rising but never capsizing the boat. It was as if the water itself bent around them, unwilling to drown what it now claimed. When the storm finally passed, the sky cleared into bruised silver. Mira slumped against the mast, exhaustion pressing her down. Cale slept curled beside her, unharmed. She looked east, toward the faint line of land on the horizon. Somewhere out there lay the edge of every map, a place untouched by crown or creed. Maybe there she could learn what she truly was. But even as she thought it, the mark throbbed again, an answering pulse from far away, steady as a promise or a threat. And in the heart of Erendel, the Alpha King lifted his head at the same instant, eyes dark with understanding. The bond was alive, and neither of them could escape it now. The island rose from the fog like a wound in the sea. It was small, barely more than a scatter of black cliffs and dead trees, but as Mira guided the boat toward it, she felt the same pull she'd felt the night her hands first glowed. A hum in the bones, a quiet insistence in her blood. The tide carried them to a narrow cove where a ruin waited, half swallowed by vines and thyme. Cale stirred awake as the keel scraped the shore. Where are we? I don't know, Mira said, but something brought us here. The air smelled of salt and ash. The ruins weren't just old, they were ancient, older than any stone she'd ever seen in the kingdom. Each block was carved with looping symbols that shimmered faintly under the light. In the center of the island, a broken tower leaned toward the sea like a dying sentinel. They climbed the slope in silence. Seabirds wheeled overhead. The wind whispered through the empty arches. Inside the tower, the air was cool and still. Runes crawled across the walls, pulsing faintly with the same pale light that lived beneath Mira's skin. Cale ran his fingers over one of them. It feels warm. Mira knelt beside him, tracing another. It's the same as my mark. You think this place knows you? Maybe, she said. Or maybe it remembers something I've forgotten. A soft sound came from deeper in the tower, stone shifting against stone. Mira froze, every instinct bristling. A shape moved in the gloom. A tall figure draped in tattered robes, face hidden by a hood. You took your time, it said, the voice neither man nor woman, ageless and rough as gravel. Mira stepped in front of Cale. Who are you? The last keeper of the Temple of Ashes, the figure said. You are Mira of the Low Moon, bearer of the mark. And that, a glance at the boy, is the heir who should have drowned in blood, but did not. Mira's pulse jumped. You know us? The keeper nodded slowly. I dreamed of you before your mothers were born. The Moonfire warned that the line would cross itself again. I don't understand. The figure gestured toward the runes. Long ago, the Alpha's blood and the Moonfire were one. Power shared, not owned. But greed split them. The fire slept, waiting to rise in one born without rank, one strong enough to carry both light and shadow. You mean me? The keeper smiled faintly. You and the king. The bond is not a curse, it is a call. Together you will either heal the divide or burn the world to ash. Mira shook her head. I don't want this. I just want the boy safe. The keeper's gaze softened. Safety is an illusion, child. Destiny does not ask permission. Before she could answer, the ground shuddered beneath them. Dust rained from the ceiling. Kale gasped and clung to her cloak. From outside came a sound she knew too well. Horns. Deep, resonant, royal. The keeper tilted their head, listening. He's found you. Mira ran to the broken archway. Across the narrow strait, ships gleamed in the sunlight, sleek war vessels bearing the crest of the moon crown. She could see banners snapping in the wind, hear the faint clatter of armor. At the prow of the lead ship stood a single figure, cloaked in black, silver hair catching the light. Even across the water, she could feel his gaze like a touch. The Alpha King. How? She began. He followed the bond, the keeper said simply. As he was meant to. Mira turned, desperate. Then help me stop this. The keeper raised a hand. I cannot stop what was written, but I can show you what waits if you fail. The tower darkened. The air turned heavy, shimmering with smoke. Images bloomed around them, visions pulled from the stones themselves. Mira saw Arundel burning, the sea boiling, wolves made of fire tearing through the forests. In the midst of it stood Orin and herself, back to back, light and shadow twined together until neither could tell where one ended. Kale whimpered, covering his ears. The vision vanished. The keeper lowered their hand. Balance must be restored, or the moon will devour its own children. Mira's knees threatened to give out. I can't fight him. No, the keeper agreed. You must reach him before the fire does. The bond is the key. Use it or it will use you. Outside, the ships drew closer. The first row of soldiers was already disembarking onto the beach. The keeper stepped aside. Go to the heart of the island. The circle still lives. The Moonfire will answer you there. Mira grabbed Kale's hand. Come on. They ran through the ruins, the path twisting upward toward a ring of standing stones that crowned the island's peak. The air shimmered with energy. In the center of the circle, a pool of light churned like liquid moonlight. Mira, Kale gasped, pointing back down the hill. The king's men had reached the shore, forming ranks. And there, riding ahead of them, sword drawn, was Orin himself. Her mark flared. His did too, faint and distant, but visible even from here. The space between them rippled. The boy clutched her arm. He's not going to hurt you, he said, almost pleading. She wanted to believe that. But the fire rising inside her made her skin burn and her vision blur. She could feel the Moonfire responding to the bond, wild and alive. The keeper's voice echoed faintly across the wind. If you call the flame, you cannot turn it back. The king was almost upon them. His soldiers shouted warnings, forming a ring around the stones. The sky darkened, clouds swirling around the moon even though it was day. Mira stood at the circle's edge, every instinct screaming to run, but there was nowhere left to run to. She looked down at her palm, at the glowing crescent that had ruled her life since that night in the forest. Then she stepped into the circle. Light exploded outward, white and searing. The earth shook. The sea roared. And for the first time since the age of the first wolves, the Moonfire woke in full. The light tore the sky open. It wasn't the warm, silvery glow that had saved Mira in the forest. It was alive, a wild tide of brilliance that swallowed sound and shadow alike. The soldiers staggered back, shouting, their blades flashing uselessly in the storm of radiance. Even Orin's horse reared, screaming, before he leapt down, landing hard on the stone. He felt the pull of the bond before he saw her, the way her power bled through the air like fire through oil. At the heart of the circle, Mira stood motionless, hair streaming in the wind, her skin alight with the white flame of the moonfire. The light carved a halo around her, beautiful and terrible. Cale stood just beyond the circle, tears streaking his face, shouting her name, but the sound barely reached her through the roar of power. Orin moved toward her, fighting the weight of the energy pressing against him. The closer he came, the stronger it grew, a heartbeat that wasn't his pulsing inside his veins. When he stepped across the boundary of the stones, the force hit him full in the chest and threw him to his knees. Mira.
His voice was raw.
Stop. You'll tear the island apart. Her eyes opened. They weren't her eyes anymore. Pure light, endless and unreadable. I didn't call it, she said. It called me. The air shimmered, and a voice, not hers, not his, filled the circle. Deep and resonant, the sound of tide and thunder together. Two bloodlines divided, bound once more. Balance through union or ruin through pride. Orin staggered to his feet, every muscle trembling. You think this is destiny? You think the gods care who burns? He reached for her, his hand brushing her arm, and the world flared white again. Memory and magic flooded him, the ancient temple, the first wolves, the moment when Alpha and Moonfire had been one. He saw their bond not as chains but as something older, a pattern written into the bones of the world. Mira saw it too. Through the blinding light, their thoughts collided. She saw him not as the distant king but as a man shaped by loss, his mate dying in childbirth, his son almost taken by rogues, his crown a weight that had ground him hollow. And beneath it, the same fear she carried, that the power inside them would destroy more than it saved. The vision broke. They stood inches apart, the wind screaming around them. Orin's hand still on her arm, her pulse racing beneath his fingers. You can't contain it alone, he said. Let me in. Mira shook her head. If I do, it could kill us both. Then it will end with both of us, he said quietly. But not with you alone. For a moment she looked at him, this man who had hunted her, who was supposed to be her enemy, and saw in his eyes the reflection of the same impossible light. Something in her gave way. She reached for him. Their palms met, mark to mark. The circle erupted. Light cascaded into the sky, a column that split the clouds and bathed the world in silver. The sea surged outward in a ring of foam, racing toward the horizon. Soldiers dropped their weapons, blinded. The tower below them cracked and fell, the ancient runes igniting one by one. Inside the storm, time stopped. Orin felt her thoughts brush his, raw, fierce, human. Her fear, her anger, her longing to be free of every chain. He offered back what he had left, the steadiness of a man who had learned to rule himself before ruling others. Together they steadied the fire, shaped it, bent it to their shared will. When the light finally faded, the two of them stood at the center of the ruined circle. The stones were scorched black. The sky had cleared to impossible blue. Around them, the soldiers were kneeling, not in fear, but in awe. Mira's knees gave out. Orin caught her before she fell. The mark on their palms had changed. No longer crescent, no longer divided. It was a full circle, faintly luminous. The air smelled of rain and salt and new beginnings. Cale ran to them, throwing his arms around both. It stopped, he whispered. You stopped it. Mira managed a weary smile. For now. Orin looked at her, the corner of his mouth curving despite the exhaustion in his face. You've no idea what you've done. Neither do you, she said. And that's what frightens me. He laughed once, quietly, almost human. Then we'll learn together. By nightfall, the ships had been repaired enough to carry them back to Arundel. The ruins of the temple smoldered behind them, the sea around the island still glowing faintly with the memory of the moonfire. Mira stood at the rail, watching the water. Orin joined her, silent for a long while. Your people will fear me, she said finally. They already do, he answered. But fear isn't always the end of faith. Sometimes it's where it begins. She turned toward him. And what about you? He met her gaze. I think, he said, that the world has been waiting for both of us longer than we can imagine. The ship rocked gently beneath them, the horizon wide and bright. For the first time in her life, Mira didn't feel like running. The fire inside her had quieted to a steady warmth. The mark on her hand pulsed once more, not in warning, but in promise. Far behind them, the island sank slowly into the sea. The old order had broken, and the new one was just beginning to breathe. The waves settle, the fire sleeps, and somewhere between crown and curse, two souls who were never meant to meet have rewritten the fate of their world. Mira, the outcast Omega who dared to touch the light. Orin, the Alpha King who found the one thing he could never command. Their story isn't over, it's only just beginning. If this tale pulled you into its world, if you felt the bond between light and shadow, then stay with us. More stories are waiting. Of forbidden magic, broken kingdoms, and love that burns brighter than destiny. Subscribe for more dark fantasy love stories, where every heart carries a secret and every ending is just another beginning. Until next time, keep the fire alive and follow the moonlight home.